How can a simple change in engine temperature make Mercedes the most feared team of 2026, while rival engineers can only watch and complain? On January 21st, 2026, Mercedes presented the W17 with a calm that bordered on the disturbing. No grandiose promises, no pyrotechnic show, not even an attempt to sell smoke. Just the car, the data, and a team that had worked in silence for 2 years. What no one at that time understood, or at least not fully understood, was that they were witnessing the beginning of a new era in Formula One. The FIA for 2026 limited the compression ratio to a maximum of 16:1. This was one of the cornerstones of the new regulations, aimed at simplifying power units and making them more sustainable. But Mercedes engineers, far from seeing this rule as a barrier, interpreted it as an opportunity. Article C 5.4.3 of the technical regulations is specific. FIA inspections are carried out only at room temperature and under static conditions. That is out of the race. This is where the genius comes in. Mercedes engine components, such as connecting rods, were made from materials that change shape in a controlled manner when heated. When the engine reaches its optimal operating temperature of around 900 degrees in the combustion chamber, these materials expand precisely and millimetrically. This small physical change moves the piston a few millimeters closer to top dead center, increasing the engine's effective compression ratio to values close to 18:1. On the track, this translates into brutally higher thermal efficiency. And most impressively, in the garage, when the engine is cold, it still meets the 16:1 inspection. There is no catch. There is no hidden software. There are no illegal mechanical triggers. Just a deep understanding of materials physics and a surgical execution of thermal engineering. This trick, simple in appearance but immensely complex in its execution, gives Mercedes between 10 and 20 extra horsepower per lap. Is not a marginal figure. They are vital tenths that, in modern Formula One, are equivalent to dominating or disappearing. That's the real bomb of the W17. This is not an incremental improvement. This is a new interpretation of what is legal and what is possible. While other teams follow the rules to the letter, Mercedes decided to write between the lines. This act of engineering is not only brilliant for its technical impact, but for its message. Mercedes did not return just to compete. He came back to rewrite the way an F1 car is designed, and he did it before the others even understood that there was something to discover. Once the secret under the hood of the W17 was revealed, the paddock entered a state that fluctuated between disbelief and alarm. What appeared to be just an efficient design was soon understood to be a legally devastating revolution. The figures began to circulate among engineers from other teams, between 0.2 and 0.3 seconds per lap. And in Formula One, that is not an advantage. It is a condemnation for everyone else. In a matter of hours, reactions began to filter through the hallways of the Ferrari, Honda, and Audi hospitality centers. What Mercedes had done was not only brilliant, but it felt like a trap they couldn't replicate. And the most frustrating thing of all was this. They knew it was completely legal. Outrage erupted just before Christmas 2025, when the three manufacturers lodged a formal protest with the FIA. The basis for the complaint was clear. Although the technical regulation stipulates a 16:1 limit on the compression ratio, that limit should apply at all times, not just in static inspections. What Mercedes had done to increase that ratio in racing conditions without violating the literality of the regulations was, according to them, against the spirit of the rule. But here comes the cruelest detail of this story. In F1, the spirit rarely wins when the words of the regulations are on your side. The proposal of the rival teams was aggressive. They wanted to install sensors inside the combustion chamber to measure the thermal conditions in real time and confirm whether Mercedes actually exceeded the allowed compression in full action. It was technically possible, but politically unfeasible. The logistics, the re-engineering it would require, and the deadlines made it almost a fantasy. All of this culminated in a key technical meeting called by the FIA for January 22nd, 2026, the same day Mercedes publicly presented the W17. It was a symbolically perfect moment. While the cameras focused on the silver car shining under the lights of Silverstone, in a closed room, a legal, technical, and political battle was being fought that would define the championship before it even began. And the verdict was a blow to the hearts of its rivals. The FIA refused to ban Mercedes' innovation. The reasons reveal the complex network of power that underpins modern F1. First, Mercedes had been completely transparent with the FIA from the start of its power unit development. They had requested technical clarifications, shared their plans, and got the green light at each phase. There was no intention of hiding, and that protected them legally and sportingly. Banning that design now would be retroactive, and that is not only problematic, but potentially litigious. Second, and perhaps even more important, was the political weight. Mercedes is not alone. In 2026, it supplies engines to McLaren, Williams, and Alpine, as well as its own team. Red Bull, which also applied a similar, although less effective interpretation, powers 2 more. In total, 6 of the 11 teams on the grid have a direct interest in maintaining this legal interpretation. And in Formula One, changing the technical regulations requires a supermajority that no longer exists. The situation was so unbalanced that even the opposing teams knew they couldn't do anything. The censor proposal was rejected. The option to rewrite the regulations was postponed. The only thing the FIA agreed to was to work long-term on a new inspection methodology in hot conditions, but that, and here's the key detail, will not be implemented during the 2026 season. That is to say, Mercedes has carte blanche to compete with a legal weapon that offers between 10 and 20 additional horsepower, while its rivals can only watch, complain, and lose. And there is yet another level of technical cynicism in all of this. Even if Red Bull or Ferrari wanted to copy the solution, it is already too late. Engine homologation for 2026 is closed. Mercedes already has its 16 units ready for the first race in Australia. Changing now would mean internally redesigning the engine architecture, violating budget limits, and delaying deliveries. Not even the best teams could do it in time. The paddock sums it up with a mixture of resignation and technical respect. They don't like what Mercedes did, but they can't deny it either. It's a masterpiece of legal engineering. As one Red Bull engineer said with visible frustration, the worst thing is not that they did something illegal. The worst thing is that we didn't do it first. The FIA deep down knew that if it wanted to avoid a legal war, it had to swallow hard and let it go. For Mercedes, it was the day they not only won the first battle of the championship, but also imposed the rules of the board. For its rivals, the year 2026 began with a devastating certainty. Mercedes not only arrived prepared, it arrived armored. Once it was confirmed that the FIA would not act against Mercedes, the reaction among the other teams was immediate and brutal. What began as technical bewilderment turned into strategic resignation. Within days, the conversation within the paddock stopped focusing on whether Mercedes had cheated. The real question became another, much more worrying one. How are we supposed to compete against this? The inconvenient truth for many engineers is that Mercedes didn't do anything they couldn't have done, at least in theory. The problem is that they didn't. That difference between the one who interprets and the one who executes, between the one who acts first and the one who reacts later, is what defines success in Formula One. And that became painfully clear to everyone. At the core of the crisis is the simple fact that replicating Mercedes' solution is not viable, at least not in the short term. The approval of the power units for 2026 has already been sealed. The parts are already produced, packaged, and on their way to Australia. Redesigning a system as fundamental as the geometry of the combustion chamber would involve not only reworking the engine, but also violating budget limits. In short, it's too late. In parallel, the W17 began rolling at Silverstone during its first tests in the rain. From the outside, nothing seemed particularly different. But for those who knew what the car was hiding, those 67 laps were a silent demonstration of power. Every kilometer traveled was validation that the system worked in real conditions. Every turn by Antonelli or Russell was a reminder to their rivals of what they had not done. And while Brackley's technicians were collecting data without errors, the other teams were already beginning to redesign their priorities. Some began internal studies to see if they could propose something similar in 2027. Others focused on aerodynamics and chassis, resigning themselves to losing in pure power, but trying to recover something in other areas. But the dominant feeling was the same. Mercedes had won the game before it began. Even within the FIA, the ruling did not go unnoticed. Some technical delegates privately acknowledged that they underestimated Mercedes' ingenuity. They believed that the change in regulations would limit creativity. And the opposite happened. It freed the best to think outside the box. The last piece of this domino has its own name: trust. The one that Mercedes now has, which for the first time since 2020 seems to have recovered not only performance, but authority. And the one that their rivals have lost, who see how every tenth gained in the wind tunnel or simulation software might not be enough to cut the advantage created by an internal piece that they cannot even see. This is how hegemonies are built in Formula One. Not with loud statements, but with silent movements that feel like earthquakes. And this, without a doubt, has already begun to shake the entire championship. The W17 is not simply a winning car. It is the first visible act of an invisible war that Mercedes has been preparing for years. And now that their plan has come to light, the question is no longer whether they will dominate the season, but how long this dominance will last. Leave me in the comments what you think about all this.